happy to introduce Sridhar Iyer, who is professor in Department of Computer Science and Engineering. Sridhar Iyer received his BTech, MTech, and PhD from Department of Computer Science in IIT Bombay. He is currently head of interdisciplinary program on education technology and also the Center for Distance Education, Distance Engineering Education, or CD. His current research interests are in the field of education and technology. This includes technology enhanced learning environments for thinking skills, pedagogies for effective use of educational technologies, development of ICT tools for educational applications, and computer science education research. Prior to education technology, he has worked in wireless networking protocols and mobile applications. Some of the development projects that he has conceptualized and led are Project Oscar, a repository of 450 interactive visualizations for topics at the school and higher education level, and Computer Masti, a series of books for teaching learning of computers in schools. These products have seen more than 100K downloads from 120 countries. In 2016, Computer Masti was acquired by a company, and the books are now being used in around 1,000 schools in India. So today, Professor Iyer will be talking about teaching less for learning more, active learning strategies in face-to-face and online modes. So with this brief introduction, I would like to hand over to Professor Sridhar Iyer. I'll unshare my screen.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Okay, is my screen visible?
Yeah.
It's visible.
Yeah. Maybe we can ask, we want to mute their mics. All right. So thank you for this opportunity for speaking on one of my favorite topics, which is active learning. And I've taken a slight liberty with modifying the title and made it less teaching, more learning, so that it's a little clearer as to what's happening. Okay, so as we begin, the first thing is to think of one activity that you excel at doing. Of course, we all excel at academics and research and so on, but maybe you could think of some other activity also and just bring that to your mind. I mean, give you like 30 seconds to think of that activity. So having thought of that activity, the next question is, why are you so good at this activity? What are the top 3 reasons for your mastery in this activity? What words come to mind? So having reflected about this question, many of the top 3 reasons, one of the top 3 reasons is often likely to be practice or experience, right? I mean, in a different workshop, I might have actually asked people for their reasons. Maybe we can see how many people had practice or experience. You could just write in the chat. Okay. Somebody had both. Passion, yes. Both. Interest in practice. Somebody taught you well, yes. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the key point, right? I mean, excitement in finding connections. Right. So the thing is that even when somebody has taught us well, the the reason why we get good at the activity is because we do that activity a lot, right? So now the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do you think you could have gained such mastery by listening to lectures on the topic? Like, for example, let's say you're good at swimming or cycling. Watching videos and listening to lectures is really not going to get you there, right? I mean, that's very obvious for skill-based topics, but it's also true for conceptual learning that as learners, we develop mastery through practice, right? Doing the activities rather than simply listening to lectures or watching demos. So the key is that as teachers, we must provide our students with sufficient and timely opportunities for practice. So that's the basic idea behind all of active learning techniques. So just let's take one step back and see, what has changed over the years. Why has active learning become a big deal? And as we all know, in the 20th century, information was at a premium, right? There was no internet. We are all familiar with having to go to libraries and scrounge through stacks of musty journals, and also that too with limited access, right? So the value for people who could transmit information was high, especially if they could convey the information quickly, succinctly, in a way that people could remember. So what were the students' role in that? The students' role was mostly listeners and note takers, absorbing the information during the lecture because that was the resource, and doing the practice later. So as we all know, again, what has changed in the 21st century is that information is no longer a premium. So it's not enough for teacher to only transmit the information. The students can get the information from many different sources. So we are not the only source for that. So it's necessary for us as teachers to ensure that students are able to assimilate the information through appropriate practice during the class itself. And so that's the key point here, like during the class itself, not after the class. So the way we represent this idea is that, I mean, this is not a new idea, like we're already 20 years into the 21st century. So we represent the idea as saying that there is a shift from content centric to learner centric. So how do we do this learner centric pedagogy? One way of doing that are what are called active learning techniques. And the basic idea behind these techniques is that students should go beyond listening, writing notes, or executing prescribed procedures. Students have to be asked to figure things out during the class. So for us as teachers, it needs an attitude shift from being content oriented to learning oriented, or from being how well am I lecturing to how well are they learning. Okay, this does not mean that we should not do good lecturing, nor does it mean that we should not strive to improve our lecturing. Okay, so that's important. That's a necessary condition, that we have to be good at the content, we have to be good at communicating the content. But that's no longer sufficient. What we also need to be good at now is facilitating students' assimilation of that content. So the emphasis is now, how well are they learning? Is learning really happening? How much learning is happening? Okay. So here's another reflection. So all these orange slides are ones where there is some interactivity. Okay, so we often hear people say, my lectures are very interactive. I often pause to ask students if they understood the material. I allow students to interrupt whenever they have doubts. I never hesitate to answer their questions. I show them demos, videos. I do a lot of things in my class, which keeps it interactive, and students will be learning. Okay? So the question for us to ask here is, while this is good, no doubt, okay, the question to ask is, are students doing active learning if the teacher does the above? Would you think that this is called active learning? So it's a yes or no, and please write your vote in the chat window. No, no, no. Partially, partially. Sometimes. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of no's and a few partialies and sometimes, and almost no yeses. That's really good to see, because many times when I have used this slide, I've got a whole bunch of yeses too. So the point is, why is this? Because this is our typical class, right? So if you take this class, this could be your, VMCC or, GG building or lecture hall complex, any of them. So this is typically the situation in a class. We are all having large classes now, and we are standing somewhere talking, and a lot of students are talking to each other and so on. So this is a fairly typical class nowadays. And what happens in such a class? Why these lectures may not be enough? I mean, most of you may already be familiar with the reasons, because nobody said yes to that question. But let me just go over them anyway. So the first point is, students don't pay utmost attention throughout the lecture. Okay? I mean, we are basically the ones who are most fascinated by the subject, and we are just enamored by our own lecture, right? The students are paying some attention, looking here, looking there. So that's one problem. The second problem is that students think they understand because they can follow the lecture. A lot of students feel, because the lecture was very good, we feel that, yeah, the prof did a great lecture. How much did you understand? So that is a different question. So they're not confronted with their misconceptions immediately. Okay, the third thing, again, as we all know, it's difficult to ensure that all students in the class participate actively. So we have those, few students who try to drive the pace, who keep interacting with the instructor, and students with low motivation or low achievement levels, they get left behind. And the instructor feels that, yeah, there is interaction because these few students are continuously interacting. And lastly, students may have a barrier to responding directly to the instructor, right? I mean, even if the instructor is aware that, okay, there are only 5 students in my class of 120 who are interacting with me, and tries to involve the other students, shy students will not ask questions or give answers, and forcing all students by calling upon them tends to be counterproductive. We are all familiar with this phenomenon, right? You call out a student a couple of times, and from the third class, you don't see the student in class, right? And we've done that ourselves also as students. So that's why, while interactive lectures are required, they are necessary, again, they are not sufficient. So what are these active learning strategies? Now, the requirement is that students should go beyond listening, copying of notes, execution of prescribed procedures, right? So the instructor has to design activities that require students to talk, write, reflect, and express their thinking, right? So the key requirement is that students have to grapple with the content and not simply follow the instructions. And these strategies are explicitly based on theories of learning and evaluated repeatedly through empirical research. So many of us use such strategies, even without looking at the research. Like, for example, many of us do problem solving in our tutorials. We ask students to carry out discussions. So all of these are forms of active learning strategies. The only key difference is some strategies have been systematized. They have been made systematic, and there's been a lot of research about them, so that we know exactly what benefits accrue because of those strategies and why those benefits accrue. So I'll just talk about two examples of such strategies. Okay, one of them is the peer instruction technique. So in the last session of the workshop, my colleague would have talked about this peer instruction. And basic idea is that you ask a question and get students to vote individually. And then you ask students to talk to their neighbor about what their answer was. Okay, so this could be any question. It could be a question like, you show a program and you ask them what could be the output of that program, or you ask them to look at a visualization and pause the visualization at some point and ask them to predict, okay, what's going to happen next. You can have a multiple choice question. You can say, is it going to be A, B, C, or D? And then some students will pick one choice, some others may pick another choice. Then you have them have a peer discussion on why they picked their respective choices, and then vote again. So now when they vote again, what would have happened is a lot of exchange of knowledge would have happened, and the vote often converges, not always to the correct answer. That's also a possibility. Okay, and that's when the instructor does the lecture or talks about the concept, saying that, okay, this is what happens, or you play the rest of the video, or you play the rest of the simulation. So this is the peer instruction technique. And since you are somewhat familiar with it, I won't go into the detail of it. And we have resources which can help you construct these peer instruction questions for your own course, which is at the link shown here. So there are lots of resources on the web also. So one way of doing peer instruction is to use clickers in class, as you see on the left. Another way is to use these cards, hold up choices. Even more basic way is to simply use, your hands, and so that only the instructor can see the choices. And a technology-based way is to use Mentimeter or some other apps which are similar. We'll just look at one of them shortly. Okay, so this is one technique, peer instruction, and there's a lot of resources available for reading about the technique as well as how to implement it in one's class. Another very useful technique is called Think Pair Share. So Think Pair Share, again, we have the activity constructor on the ET website. The website, the technique basically involves making students think individually, as you can see in the think phase. You make students think, then you make them pair. You make two students discuss with each other, maybe work on improving the idea in some way, and then you share the solution that they've developed with the entire class. Okay, so let me talk about an example here. So when you're doing this, so in the think phase, the teacher poses a specific question about the topic. Okay, so students can think and write down their own individual answer. Okay, so for example, here is a question, how will you sort a given set of numbers? Okay. Then what happens is in the pair phase, the teacher gives a task related to the one in the think phase. Okay, so students will pair with a neighbor to perform the task. Like in this example, I might have come up with one set of one type of sorting mechanism. You might have thought of a different sorting mechanism. Okay. So then we can discuss the pros and cons of each other's sorting solutions, right? I mean, you might say that, okay, if all the numbers are already in descending order, then your method is the least efficient. If all the numbers are more or less sorted, then my method is more efficient, and so on and so forth. And then in the share phase, the students share their thinking or the solution with the entire class, okay, where the teacher facilitates a discussion on the topic. Okay. So the discussion in this case is on different types of sorting algorithms. Okay. So I did this technique when I was teaching CS 101 to a class of 250 students in a section, right? And it resulted in 80% of the students being engaged. Okay. So the thing is, like, how do you do the share phase when you have 250 students, 400 students in your class? So what it turns out is that the types of answers that students come up with are fairly limited and they fall in some categories. Okay. So once we talk about one answer from a particular category, we can simply say that, okay, everybody who has the same category of answer need not respond. Those who have a different type of answer can respond. So this is basically the idea of think, pair, share. It's a very powerful technique for engaging a large class in design problems. The peer instruction technique is very useful for engaging a large class, for quickly checking concept attainment and checking whether they have understood or to introduce the topic. If you want them to come up with something, if you want them to create something, then think, pair, share is a very good technique. So let me pause here for a moment and give you a moment to think about what could be a think, pair, share activity that you would like to carry out in your own class. Since you did PI in the previous session, we can take a moment, we can put it in the chat as to what might be a think question you could give, what might be a pair question that you could give, and what might be a share question that you could give. I'll pause on this slide for maybe a couple of minutes. Do an activity based on what was taught in the last class. See, this is actually a very useful exercise, even though I'm kind of pausing here. Yeah, one slide pitch to potential investors of a startup. Yeah, that's a good one. So the think phase can be, one person's idea of what could be the pitch. In the pair, they can actually discuss the pros and cons of each other's pitches. And in the share, actually, you can come up with a good pitch as a group, as a set of founders. Yeah. See, one way of making use of this slide is to just think about the class that you're going to teach next week and think of what kind of a TPS activity can I do in that class. We'll come to how to do it online in a moment. Conceptual question, give a conceptual question that does not have a straightforward answer. Pose the question with a non-conventional answer, pair them to discuss. So can you give an example of the question? See, that is what helps people when we share examples with each other. then we can easily abstract the idea and apply it to our own courses. Maybe you can even just unmute and speak. That also is fine. Signal frequency that might not lead to a periodic signal. Okay. Yeah, so that's interesting because we don't know the domain. Very few of us here might know that. What are the possible failure modes of the system? Yeah, it will have multiple answers and can lead to a nice question, nice discussion at the end. Okay, so going back, let me just show you the idea of the technique once again. The idea is to make students think, and this too is not for them to just simply think, but to make them write. Because when they write, they commit to an answer. Otherwise, when you just say think, they'll just be sitting blankly. Okay, so you got to ask them to write down the answer to the question. In the pair phase, two students discuss each other's answers. They could either build upon what question that you had given in the think phase, or they could discuss pros and cons. And in the share phase, you lead a class-wide discussion on the various solutions that are emerged. So DPS is a very good technique for open-ended questions, for design problems, or even for discussing topics like to which there's no single correct answer. Okay? And more information about DPS is there in this constructor resource sheet, which you can download. Okay, so that was about TPS. So, is there evidence that these techniques work? Right? So here's an old one. It's almost 30 years old reference, right? 20 years old. Yeah. So it's a comparative study of 62 physics courses, 6,000 students across a variety of institutions. Okay? And they used a standardized test called the force concept inventory, and they did a pre-post semester long intervention. Okay? So what did they find? They found that so what you see in this graph, the red ones are the instructors who are using traditional lecture. Okay, so these were really good instructors, and they were really fabulous best teacher awardees and so on. The green ones are the instructors who are doing active learning. Okay, so now if you see on the x-axis is what the students gain. So what the students have gained. On the y-axis is the number of courses. So actually there were 14 courses where instructors were traditional, and 48 courses in which active learning strategies were there. And what they computed was this thing called normalized gain, which is basically pre minus post upon 100 minus pre. Okay, so the basic idea was to see what is the gain. So if you see that the maximum gain from lecture courses was 0.28. Okay, so you see that the red lines kind of stop here at 0.28. So it ranged from 0.12 to 0.28, with majority of the instructors being around 0.25. Okay. On the other hand, you see that the active learning techniques, they began only at 0.2 and they went all the way up to 0.7. Okay. So which basically means that even instructors who were not these best lecturers were able to, their students were able to do better on the post test because of the active learning, what they were doing in the class, the activities that they were giving in their class. Okay. So the basic implication here is that it's desirable to explicitly incorporate these active learning strategies in our own teaching and learning. So here's another evidence. So this is actually a meta-analysis of 225 studies. So a number of studies were carried out on specific topics for the effectiveness of active learning. And this is the meta-analysis of that. So what they found was that across these studies, overall, the exam performance of students is higher in courses which have active learning, okay? And the failure rates are lower. They also found that these results hold across STEM disciplines, majors, non-majors, etc. And if that's not enough, we have our own evidence. Okay? So when I was teaching CS1, which was like a few years ago, we carried out a study. So many of our PhD students from education technology, they actually sat in the classes, did observations, came up with observation protocols, and did a lot of work to find out, how effective is this think pair share in a classroom. Okay, and what we found was that even in a large class of 250, 300 students, it's possible to ensure that 83% or 80%, let's say, I mean, the number 83 is not important, but a large fraction of the class can be sustained in engagement by using such a strategy. Okay? I mean, compare this with the typical lecture oriented class, where we know ourselves that, we are lucky if we engage 20% of the class. See, because in that class, the motivation for engagement is left in the student's hands, whereas in a class where you do active learning, there is activities which ensure engagement happens. And then we also had a follow-up to say that, okay, is it only engagement that's going to happen in this class, or does learning really happen? Excuse me. So what we found was that we did a quasi-experimental study, because I was teaching two sections. In one section, I did active learning for one topic and did traditional lecturing in the other topic. And then for another topic, I did the opposite and so on. And what we found was there is a statistically significant gain for classes that have active learning in their class. Okay? So this is like a local evidence right from our own institute. Okay, so given that now there is buy-in into active learning, and we have some idea of how to do this in our classes, okay, what do we do now? No, this is how my class is looking, right? It's a bunch of icons. I am logged in from somewhere, a whole bunch of students are logged in from somewhere. Earlier in a face-to-face class, at least I had the opportunity of visual feedback to be able to look around the class and identify those who are tuned out, or identify who is engaged, and so on and so forth. Whereas here, I don't even know if anybody is listening to me, right? I mean, that's exactly the same feeling I'm having right now also in this lecture. So the only way I can make out whether anybody is listening to me is by posing questions and asking you to respond in the chat window, right? There really is no feedback to the instructor on is anything happening in the class, right? So how do you do active learning in such a class? So again, let's do an activity. So this time we will use Mentimeter. So you might have attended different talks, webinars in the last 1 year, right? We've all done plenty of these on varied platforms. So what I would like to know is, what are your top 2-3 features of such platforms which you think are effective for live interactions? So if you can just go to menti.com and put in this code 23038052, or if you're using a phone, you can just scan this QR code, then we can see what features emerge as the top 2-3 features. So let me just switch to the other window. Okay. So we'll just try to create a word cloud. Breakout rooms. Polls to see the chat window. Again, breakout rooms. Menti quiz questions. Verbal Q&A. Scaling up quick response. Teams in breakout rooms. Polls. Oh, polls. Right. I think most people have finished answering. So let me switch back to the presentation. And thank you for participating. No, so that's one of the things that tells me that okay, people are actually listening and not simply not simply a bunch of icons that I am seeing on the screen. Okay, so we've done this interactivity. We've looked at what the key features. So most people seem to think polls and breakout rooms, and I also agree with that. So polls are a very quick way of getting a feel for are people listening or are they there even in the class. And as we saw, the peer instruction technique lends itself beautifully to polls. So when we are doing peer instruction online, what you can do in your class meeting platform, be it Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever, can create a poll and ask students to vote. And then because the peer instruction requires a discussion, it's not sufficient to just do the poll. You could ask students to discuss with a friend, say using WhatsApp. So I do that routinely. I just tell students that okay, each of you find a buddy with whom you're going to work for today's class. And there is a second channel. It's a little clunky, but it does work because they do chat with each other on WhatsApp on that in order to exchange their ideas. And then you can give the same poll again and ask students to vote again. So that's a very easy way of doing peer instruction in online platforms. The other way is to use specific tools like the one that we just saw, which is Mentimeter. Okay, Mentimeter, so we use the word cloud feature of Mentimeter. Mentimeter has a whole lot of other features also. Let me just quickly show that. So if you say that, okay, I want to create a new presentation, you can have types of, let's see, okay. You can, again, these are all ones which are, yeah. You can have different types. You can have things like, you know, short answers, you can have MCQs and so on and so forth. Okay. So coming back, so Mentimeter is one tool, and then there is also many other such similar tools. Many of you may have heard of Kahoot or even used Kahoot. So it's another similar tool for quickly creating these quizzes, and it has the additional feature of being able to gamify. You can have points, and you can make it a little more engaging and fun for the students. So that's about how to do peer instruction online. How do we do TPS online? It looks a little much more complex, right? So, however, we find that it's not all that difficult also. What we can do is for the think phase, we can simply ask students to write their response on chat, right? So like what I did today. For the pair phase, we can ask them to discuss with a friend, again using a different channel. It can be WhatsApp or phone or whatever. And for the share phase, we can ask them to speak up in some order, like maybe in the order in which they posted on the chat itself. Okay. Of course, a more structured way is to use the breakout room feature, is to be able to say that, okay, this is a team, you guys go to this breakout room, discuss there and come back and then summarize and so on. However, not all platforms may support breakout rooms, and not all platforms may have sufficient number of breakout rooms for the size of your class. Okay? So in that case, it's sufficient. Even the chat feature actually does a reasonable job of helping us to carry out this TPS activity online. You should try it in your class in the next time. The other way are to use some other tools. Like one tool is Padlet. So I won't do a demo of Padlet, but I'll just show you an example of how this Padlet looked in my last class. So if you see, so this was a course that I taught last semester, and there was a debate basically. One day, one group had to argue on why should we use technology tools in education, while another group had to argue on why should we had to argue against and say why not to use technology for tools in education. And in Padlet, basically, I created two columns and gave these questions, and students basically just had to respond to it as comments in that column. So you could use this technique for also doing think pair share, where every student writes their answer and they have to respond to one other student's answer. Okay, so the idea is not that students discuss face to face so much, but they are looking at other people's ideas. So however you get them to look at other people's ideas, it's a win. It doesn't matter whether they're able to talk to each other or not. The other way of doing this is to use the Jamboard feature. I mean, again, many tools have this feature of free format writing, or even simply to use Google Slides. You could have students collaborate on slides, have one student write on one slide, another student write on another slide. Then together they use both theirs to come up with the slide for the pair phase and so on. So here's another example of Jamboard. So this was in my last class where they had to look at some examples of educational apps and try to categorize them. So these are like categories which students have come up with. This is a group of 3 students who are working together, looking at these apps and trying to categorize them that, okay, these are on content learning, these are on assessment, and so on and so forth. So again, this is a very useful way of ensuring that students are active in the class. Okay, so let me kind of talk about a few more strategies, or rather one more strategy. So this is for addressing the muddy points, so the doubts that students have at the end of the class, right? So in a face-to-face class, many students will come up to you at the end of the class and talk to you, and usually that's the part which we all as instructors enjoy, right? Interacting with students after the class. So now here, how do we do that in the online mode? Often we say that if anybody has a question, please stay. But then very few students stay, and then some of them don't want to talk in public. They want to talk to you by themselves and so on, right? So that doesn't work out very well. So a simple way of doing that is to ask students to post muddy points which are not clear on the chat. And then we address these on the course platform, whatever it may be, whether it is Moodle or Google Classroom or any other platform that you're using, by providing supplementary materials. And we can ask TAs to write summary of the key point for those who are unable to join and post these summaries. These have been found to be very useful. So in the last semester, my TA actually did an excellent job of writing these summaries, and it itself kind of became a reasonable set of notes for the course. And then we follow these up by giving them homework assignments, which we call as learning by doing activities. Okay, so let me give one example. So this semester, I'm teaching a course called Educational App Design. Okay. So in the last class, which was on Thursday in slot 8, which was a 1.5 hour slot, so what I had was 6 voting questions that students had to answer. And so the voting question was very simple: to show an app and to ask them, is this an educational app? So maybe I'll just show you the slides. Okay. So these kind of voting questions, right? You show them an app and say, okay, is this an educational app? You know, this Google Bolo. And then you show another app which is like Moodle on mobile and say, okay, now if Google Bolo is an educational app, is Moodle on mobile an educational app? Or you look at FET, or you look at Google Classroom and so on. So the whole point was to elicit what their prior conceptions was. So what is an app and what's not an app? So that distinction itself has got blurred nowadays. So I had 6 voting questions in which they interacted, and then we discussed about that. Then there was a Google form to be filled by each student, where they had to watch a video and categorize the 10 educational apps. So let me also show you the form. Okay, so this was the activity. So there was a video that they had to watch, and as you watch each description, note down some tags or categories that come to your mind. So this was a pretty long activity. So it was I gave them 20 minutes to do that, and it worked out very nicely, because when I looked at the form, different students had given different categorizations, and we were able to nicely evolve a set of categories for that, for each of those apps that were discussed in that video. Okay. So after that, we also had one chat response question. So having seen all these different varieties and categories, what is the must-have features in an educational app? So again, here different students came up with different ideas, different must-have features, and they all responded on the chat. And finally, there was a Jamboard collaborative activity for attempting to evolve a taxonomy of these educational apps. And all of this got done in 1.5 hours. And students not only enjoyed the activities, they also learned a lot, because they were now able to think in terms of categories. They had realized that okay, there's no single definition. They had realized that all of this depends upon what you believe are must-have features, and we were able to come up with a taxonomy for the lengths that we were going to use in the course. Okay? So this basically summarizes the philosophy of less teaching and more learning, right? So I must have lectured for maybe 20 minutes in that class, and 1 hour was activities and discussions and students kind of debating with each other as to why something should be categorized in one way and not categorized in another way. And my job was basically to moderate the discussion. I must say that this was a small class, so I could allow students to freely unmute and speak. In a large class, it gets a little trickier, but again, it's possible to do. So that's the point. And so the key takeaway from here is that we want to make students grapple with the content during the class. We don't want to only clarify doubts, but we want to provide frequent opportunities for learners to work with the content, ensure immediate and appropriate feedback. And the key point about these two active learning techniques, peer instruction, is don't just keep your MCQs for the exam, make them do them in the class. And for Think Pair Share, it is, don't just lecture, but make students do something first so that they can get engaged with the content. So this is the main portion of today's interaction. I'll also talk very briefly about one more set of resources. So this set of resources might be useful for creating your online course material. So these are the principles for online teaching. So
Can I interrupt? Just
Sure.
one. In the previous slide,
This one?
the previous, no, just the one before. I think you had a summary slide. The next one. Yeah, so the last one. Yeah, here you're saying this peer instruction. You say don't keep MCQs for the exam. Make students so. So this is kind of the thing you're suggesting that not as a. I mean, you can have MCQs in exam, but use them
course.
during this kind of.
Yes,
Is that
yes,
what
of
you're?
course. Yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying, yeah, exactly. So, see, typically we keep the MCQs in the exam. I'm saying don't keep the MCQ only for the exam.
Okay,
Make-
okay. Yeah, I
make
think
them-
yes.
Use them in the class also.
So, if I may ask, this should be a formative assessment, no marks assigned to that.
No marks assigned. Yeah, this is typically formative assessment. And yeah, there are no marks assigned for it. I mean, the whole idea is to get a feel for, conceptual learning that's happening in the class, right? For both for you as well as for the student. They also get a feel for what, were they thinking about the correct answer, or were they thinking about, what was the choice that they had made? And it's very low stakes, so that's when people are free to express their opinions without any hesitation.
Okay, so I
Yeah, thanks.
have a somewhat side question to this. So you talked about muddy points.
Yes.
See, earlier in earlier workshop which Professor Freud conducted, he used to hand over a piece of paper to everyone and ask them to write about what was good and what was bad, what was not clear. Not say bad, but what was not clear. But what I found was that was anonymous. No, if those chits were handed over. So if you do it online many times, that makes the person has to reveal his identity or her identity, they may not be comfortable. Are there
Well,
ways to do it without any?
yeah. So, I mean, you can do it in both ways. You can do it anonymously by simply allowing them to, fill an anonymous question. Like, for example, if you take, let's say, like this time, I'm using this Google Classroom. Okay, so I'll just quickly show you. So, if you go to Google Classroom, what you do is, you create a question and you say, okay, what are your muddy points? And then you say it's a short answer question, and then you can say that, okay, I don't want to send it to my class, so I'm just going to save it as a draft. Okay, and where did the question go? Okay, so here is the muddy points, and now when the student clicks on it, they're basically able to write the question. So unless you have not asked them to write their name or anything in it, so all they do is they have to just simply write their short answer to that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are some tools. For example, if you set such a thing in Moodle, then that automatically reveals the identity. But here, okay, you can do it.
No, so what you could do is simply create one Google form, called
yeah,
Muddy Points,
yeah.
and allow that form to be anonymous. And you could just make that link. I mean, use the same link for every class so that students know that whenever they have a muddy point, they just go to that link and write the question there.
Okay.
And that keeps getting accumulated in your Google Form spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And you just look at which ones are there and keep addressing them, which ones multiple students have had. So, for example, when I used to do when I did CS 101 a few years ago, I used to carry a box, a box and a lot of chips of paper. So, and I used to just put it on the desk, saying that, okay, this is the box, and anybody could just come pick up a piece of paper, write their muddy point in it, and put it in the box and go. And in the next class, I would have looked at all the muddy points that have come out from the class, and then made one slide saying, okay, this is the categories of muddy points that I see, and this is what needs to be addressed, and so on. So this is a class of 250. So the same feature can be done by your Google form, where you leave the thing anonymous.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So any other interaction at this point?
Yeah, this is Guru Rajan.
Sure.
I thought
Yeah.
in Moodle also you can have an anonymous survey, right? So where
I haven't used
it's
it in
possible to
Moodle.
do it in Moodle
Ah,
also to get that.
I think so. I think so. But I mean, I have not actually used it, so that's why I didn't want to say that so confidently. So yeah, thanks for saying that. Yeah.
You can use Padlet also for anonymous feedback. That is, it's
Yeah.
possible in Padlet also.
Yeah, Padlet also is possible. Yeah, like this one, for example, you see a whole bunch of anonymous in that. Like on this slide, if you see, so there's a whole bunch of okay, so there's a whole bunch of anonymous in that, right? I mean, people have answered anonymously, and if people want to share their name, they can put their name. Yeah. Okay, so let me just quickly wrap up before we get into interaction. So what I wanted to share are these, 6 principles for online teaching, which we came up with over the years, as we were working on this research on online teaching. But we kind of distilled them last year when we all had to go online. So I'll just quickly share them and then give you the resource where you can look at it more if you want. So one principle is to curate content before you create. Okay? So there's a lot of content available, and it's really not worth sitting and doing one more monolithic lecture video. I mean, it's useful to do interaction with your student in the time that you meet with students, but it's really not very necessary to do a monolithic information transmission. There's a lot of materials is there. A good way to use them is to use that and then design an activity around it. Like for example, what I did in this slide that I showed, that so this is a video. I just said watch this video. It's not my video. Somebody else has created the video, but I know what it contains and I know what I want to do with that video. So I got students to fill up this form, and maybe I can even quickly show you what kind of responses came for that form. So for that form, students had responses like a whole bunch of categories. Students wrote responses to each of these, and that was very, and this was anonymous, so it was not an issue for students at all. So curating material is a good way of ensuring that you spend the class time on discussion and not on simply information transmission. So the second principle is that it's good to keep videos short and also use reflection spots in video. So reflection spots are these slides that I had in this talk, where you ask somebody to post on the chat or you ask them to think about something so that there is some interaction that happens. The third principle is to give a lot of practice, and immediately and frequently. So this is something which happens reasonably in face-to-face classrooms, but in online, it's very important to pay attention to this, because once students start getting left behind, it's much more difficult for them to catch up because they think, okay, I'll see all the videos later, and that never happens, right? So it's important to have small assignments with short deadlines, so that students feel that, okay, in the next couple of hours, I'll just finish this and then move on to the next thing. So they stay with the course rather than everything getting piled up towards the end of the course. So that's the third principle. The fourth one is to be able to provide diverse resources to cater to different learners. So this is again something that we do naturally in our face-to-face classes. When a student comes up to you and asks that, okay, I'm more interested in that topic, then you say, okay, you go read up this book. Or somebody else says, I want to know more about applications, and then you direct them to some other website which talks about applications of that topic that you are teaching. So the same thing now in online, because students don't come up to you so often, you have to provide it to students on your own, and you have to anticipate that, okay, some may want resources of one type, others may want resources of another type, and make it available and incentivize the access to these resources by having some very small quiz with some, let's say, 1 mark weightage or something, so that they at least look at the resources of their own interest. Then the other idea is to leverage this peer learning. So to bring in diverse perspectives, to discover additional resources, and very importantly in online, to avoid these isolation issues. So just making one student talk to one other student goes a long way in avoiding this feeling of isolation. Otherwise, they're just, like I showed, they're just icons on a screen. And to them also, the others are just icons on a screen. So it's very important that, we make a student talk to at least one other student so that it addresses both the isolation issue as well as they can, do some peer learning activity and feel that, okay, others are also struggling, or, I'm not the only one who's struggling, or that I have this perspective, you have that perspective, and learning happens in that way. And finally, the important thing to keep in mind is to respond to student actions in a timely and appropriate manner. Okay. So this, again, in a face-to-face class, this would happen automatically because students will come up to you and ask you either before the class or after the class, right? I mean, especially let's say they want, most commonly they want deadline extension. Okay, so these things get discussed as a matter of routine as part of the class, and we don't even notice that this has happened within the class. Okay, whereas in the online, it's going to come to you as an email, or it's going to go and sit in your LMS as something. And if we don't respond to them in a timely manner, then again students get left out. So it's important to adapt based on student actions. Like, to give you an example, in my first class, I actually asked students, okay, what is it that you want to learn in this course? So some of them, and I also look for what is the background that they have already in programming in order to build these educational apps. Okay, so I found that what they want to learn and the type of background they have was slightly different from what I had, assumed or anticipated. And now, because I did that activity in the first class, I'm able to adapt my rest of my course so that they get the maximum out of it, and not simply deliver the course as per what I thought would have been ideal. So this orchestration is again a very important principle in online learning. So more of this is there in this website that we created last year. So this is a self-paced course that we have developed at IITB. This is the link. Last year, in fact, there was even a Moodle course based on this. So all the resources are available here.